All right, so Carmelina, let me know when we're ready to start the
Yeah.
chat. I've got a couple.
Ready to go.
Okay, all right, great, awesome. All right, well, welcome everyone. Excited you're on today. And Marty, it's great to be with you. Thanks again for sharing your time, letting us pick your brain and sharing your wisdom with us today. So we've got roughly 50 folks in the session today. So I'm anticipating lots and lots of questions. Marty, I know you've participated in several of these Ask Me Anything sessions, but for those of you who haven't done anything like this before, we've got roughly 40 minutes together, and you can ask Marty any product-oriented question that you want in the Zoom chat box. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that. Once I see a question come through, I'll read that off for Marty to respond to. So feel free to start dropping those questions into the Zoom chat box so that we can make the most of the time that we have together here. To get us started, I've got a couple questions that I'd like to ask you, Marty, as folks start to get the juices flowing. So how's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So first off, I read your book, Inspired. Whoops, I'm not a book bracket girl, so Inspired on the side here, and absolutely loved it. It was my first product book that I read, so it really opened my eyes into just kind of what makes great product teams and areas for improvement. So thanks for distilling your knowledge into an excellent book. One of the items you talk about in the book is bringing engineering teams into product conversations and discovery on a regular basis. So, I'm curious to learn from you for PMs and engineers who've not historically worked together. How would you advise a PM and an engineer to spend some time together to understand, one another and start to bridge that relationship?
Yeah, it's funny because if you would have asked me that question 20 years ago, I would not have believed you that there were people like that. Because I grew up in the industry where, you may do a session just engineers. Hopefully you include your product manager or designer, but you would always have your engineers in. But over the last 20 years, I have met teams that they do not view engineers that way. They view engineers as like, oh, well, we can either hire Accenture or we can outsource it to India, or we can, I'll just tell the engineer what to build. And at first I was just very confused. And then I started to realize this is an anti-pattern for severely dysfunctional product teams. So I went, fortunately, I don't encounter it all the time, but I do see it regularly. And I'll really have a heart-to-heart with the product manager and say, like, I don't know what you were taught. I don't know who told you this, but you've got some really broken ideas about how products are created. And I explained to them, just you tell me your favorite product. And most of them, whether it's whatever, it might be an iPhone, or it might be AWS, or it might be a Peloton, it might be whatever. And I'm like, okay, let me tell you the backstory with that product. You know who thought of that idea? Engineers. And I'm like, constantly. And I explain to them the root of a product is something, a real customer problem for sure, but solved in a way that's just now possible. So that's why you really don't want to have these kinds of learning discovery sessions without engineers. At the very least, the tech lead. At the very least, the tech lead. The truth is we don't always get the ideal world. The ideal world, and I'll admit it, is in my favorite companies, they're all the engineers. And in fact, they'd be very angry if you had a session with a user or customer and didn't include them. But sometimes, the engineers are scattered around time zones all over the planet, and it's like the middle of the night for them. And so you can't always get all of them, but you always you really want to make sure you have at least the tech lead. And frankly, the magic happens when the tech lead is there. So the real part of your question gets to understanding the true role of engineers. Mm-hmm. And it is more than just writing code. It is to help. We look for engineers, and all the best companies look for engineers that care just as much about what they build as how they build.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Makes a ton of sense. Thank you. All right, so we've got our first question in here. How do you keep up with your own learning and reading with so many draws on your time? It's a good one.
Well, I know the best thing about starting my own little partnership was, you're your own boss, so you get to decide how you spend your time. And I explicitly wanted to write, and you really can't write without doing a lot of reading. And so, the hard part for me is there's a lot of voices today in product, more than ever. And I'll also say, I think there's more good voices in product than ever, but there's also more noise than ever. So one of the hardest things for me is to separate, the signal from the noise. I will tell you that I find social media probably the worst form of learning out
Okay.
there. So I know that lots of people love it, but I'm like, oh my God, maybe 1 out of 20 things on there makes any sense. So and I feel so sorry for the people that don't have enough experience to know which is the one that makes sense. But so you all have to choose, what to do. But there are good books today. There are podcasts, and yeah, I'll tell you, a lot of times there's a set of people that I really respect in the industry, and when they tell me, oh, you should check out this book, I'm like, I can't wait to read it. So I guess the real answer to that is there's a set of people I use as my filters,
Okay.
people I've come to trust, and that makes sure that most of the time when I read something, I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful that somebody shared that. And I try to share great books when I read them too.
Yeah, yeah. Other than the books that you and your group have written, loved, empowered, inspired, which other books would you recommend product managers read and study?
Sure. Well, Teresa Torres's new book called Continuous Discovery Habits, absolutely, you should read that. It's kind of a natural complement to Inspired. So if you liked Inspired, I think you'll really like her book. And it's really hands-on, like product managers, designers, engineers, how they do the daily work of discovery. So I think that's a terrific book. And that's of course more hands-on for product teams. At the other level, there's a new book out by Tony Fadell. Tony was the main product person behind the iPod at Apple, and then the iPhone, one of the main ones. And then he's the guy who started Nest to make the Nest devices. And so he is an amazing product leader, and he created a book. He wrote a book called Build. And that's just a fantastic book. In fact, I'd say that's probably my favorite now, written for the sort of CEO crowd that describes what a good product organization is. But, there are a half a dozen terrific books for senior leaders now to help them explain what a product organization is. Working Backwards, it talks about how Amazon works, is an excellent book. No Rules, it talks about how Netflix works, is an excellent book. And they're all describing what I try to do is share the techniques that they all use. But it's good those are written like for CEOs. My audience is aimed more at product leaders and product teams. Mm-hmm. Teresa's audience is definitely hardcore product teams, hands-on, trying to innovate every single week. But those will get you started.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, so got a question that just came in through the chat. What advice do you have for startups balancing between designing great UX, but having to take on technical or design debt due to either having to move quickly or not having the resources necessary to build the product the way they want? I can reread that if you want me to.
No, I got it. I'm looking at it too. And it's a good question. It's just that I'm thinking a little bit that, normally one of the real advantages of a startup is that you don't have this problem. This is much more commonly a problem of big old legacy companies. Pretty much all of them, have this. In fact, you learn the hard way. If you're not working on addressing tech debt consistently all the time, it doesn't take long to get into this mess, especially if you have a feature factory kind of model. You just crank out features, no regard for infrastructure, platform, tech debt gets crazy out of control. So at startups, normally it is all about one thing, and that's coming up with product market fit, getting to product market fit. If you don't do that, it's game over, really. So it's only a question of, do you do that before you run out of money or patience? So tech debt starts on day one, don't get me wrong, but it's normally very manageable at the smaller. So might be that the question is really aimed at maybe older startups that are starting to get that. Now, design debt is kind of a different thing. Everybody loves to say debt, just like everybody loves to say ops. Design debt is not the same as tech debt. And design debt, doing redesigns is normal part of where I love redesigns, and especially when we remove things that aren't really valuable and adding complexity. So design debt is a much more manageable thing. It's normally part of our cadence of moving our products forward. Tech debt is tougher because it has to be done more holistically. That might be a topic that's more in the weeds for a lot of the people. It is a super important topic. If you don't address tech debt, it can literally kill your company. And there are not many things I can say that about. But so it is serious. But normally for a small startup, boy, I hope you don't have to worry too much about that. You have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah. All right. Another one that came in here. What advice do you have for folks pushing for true Agile, Scrum product management and organizations that are using frameworks like SAFe and have program management and heavy gatekeeping of work and processes?
Yeah, this is kind of a trigger for me. This is a really bad situation in our industry. It's referred to loosely as fake Agile. So there's nothing Agile about SAFe at all. They just very cynically included it in their title because they hope a bunch of clueless CIOs will buy it. Sadly, they've been right. And a lot of people bought it, but there's nothing Agile about it. It is old school waterfall stage gate. We know that. Let me just put it this way. There's a broader issue going on. There's a much broader issue. Agile started as a set of principles. You can read the principles. It's called the Agile Manifesto. It's really good. If you've been an engineer before, you're like, yeah, that totally is what I've learned. Those are good things. But then, frankly, a whole bunch of process people took it over. And even Scrum. The good news is Scrum is simple, but it's a process. And it's not a set of principles. It's a process. It's a delivery process. The good news is there's a lot of companies that are so messed up that even basic Scrum is good progress. I have got a friend that he's pretty famous in the industry, Jeff Patton. He likes to say, he teaches beginning teams Scrum for the same reason when you learn to ski, they teach you to snow plow at first. I realize a lot of you are in the Midwest and there's not a lot of hills, but when you learn to ski, you learn to snowplow for one reason. They want you to be able to get down the mountain without hurting yourself or anybody else. Once you can do that, you can start to learn to ski. Because snowplow is not really skiing, as you probably know. But he likes to argue it's the same thing. He says he teaches teams Scrum first to kind of get them so they can get down the mountain without hurting themselves or anybody else. But he likes to tell the teams, but Scrum is not skiing. Scrum is not like what good teams do. Good teams are doing continuous delivery. It's, what's good about Scrum, if you really do it, is you're making yourselves get to at least once every 2 weeks to release. If you're not releasing at least once every 2 weeks, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care how many Agile coaches you have. I don't care if you have certified Scrum product owners, which is as worthless as saying you know how to use Google Docs. Okay, that's useless. But I don't care. You're not Agile. You're just not. So minimum releasing once every 2 weeks. If you're releasing monthly or even worse, quarterly, and believe it or not, there's even worse than that, you don't fool yourselves. You're not getting any of the benefits. You're just doing the rituals. So this is what matters. What matters is continuous delivery. That's where you want to get to. Minimum is once every 2 weeks. You asked about books. Where is it? There is another book that's really good. I probably should have listened, but this is more not for the product crowd. This is for the engineering crowd. Accelerate basically makes the argument that good companies have been doing continuous integration and continuous delivery for 20 years. And there's a lot of evidence why that is better for you and better for your customers. So if somebody is telling you that things like safe is a good thing, you owe it to yourself and your company to educate yourself, because it's not.
Mhm.
And by the way, I can't name a single good product company using that. That should scare you.
Scary. Okay, very good, very good. Kind of to dovetail off that a little bit, if you're not working in Agile, can you leapfrog to continuous delivery, or must you learn to snowplow first?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because one of the things that's been pointed out for years is in many of the very best companies in the world, they have been doing continuous delivery for years, but they think Agile is a bunch of BS.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hard to argue with them. Which one is more Agile? The one doing continuous delivery, or the one following all the rituals with all the certified process people that releases once a quarter? You tell me. So kind of hard to argue with them. They're right. So no, you don't need Agile, honestly. I still think Agile is good if you don't fall into the trap of the fake Agile thing, especially if, in your company, you're trying to impose some level of cadence. And Scrum is based on what's called the release train model, where you just get here's what happens, and stop me if I'm getting too much in the weeds. If you release once a month or once a quarter, as far as the company's concerned, if you don't get something in that release, it's never going to happen. It may never get out. And so it creates all this pressure to put all this stuff, which makes it even slower, which makes it even later, which makes all the interdependencies. You have lots of bugs. Your customers have to deal with change. And it is just so dysfunctional. Once you start a release cadence of every 2 weeks, a release is going out. If something's not ready, no worries. It goes on the next release. That changes the mindset. And people stop thinking, oh, we have to get it into the quarterly release. They're like, it'll go out on the next train. Yeah, it's fine. So, and of course, when you get to continuous delivery, it's a complete non-issue, because we're doing dozens of micro releases every day. So as soon as something's ready, it just deploys. Release becomes a non-event.
Got it. So a similar question, I don't think you can see this one, Marty, it was sent as a direct message, but along the lines of continuous discovery and delivery, what recommendations, resources, or framework do you recommend in ensuring that continuous discovery is part of product delivery as opposed to an afterthought?
Well, it's not part of product delivery, just to be clear. In a good product teams, there's lots of techniques out there, lots of processes, obviously. I just mentioned a few delivery processes like Scrum and Kanban and CI/CD. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of discovery processes. Normally, discovery is happening in parallel to delivery all the time. Mm-hmm. So discovery just means we're figuring out good stuff to build. And delivery means we're building it and deploying it. So there's not rocket science there. It's just conceptually, those two things are going on all the time. So the real question is, how do you make sure you're coming up with good things to build? The bigger issue in most companies, and the root cause of why they're not, literally most companies, it's more like 80% of what they build does not meet their business objectives. It's not a very good track record for an industry. And what's really going on is the root of those things. The stakeholders are coming up with these roadmaps of all the features that they think are going to work. Well, that's not what a good product company does. In a good product company, they come up with, the leaders of the company come up with critical problems to solve. They might be customer problems or they might be company problems. And then they give those problems to product teams. And product teams are asked to come up with a solution worth building. That's what product discovery is. Discover a solution worth building. That means coming up with a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, and viable.
Mm-hmm.
That's what product discovery is. We have all kinds of techniques to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Inspired talks about techniques, and Teresa's book double clicks in on a few techniques to go really deep on them. They're great. They're all good techniques. And the idea is you use the right one for the job. Sometimes we're working on really risky things. Sometimes we're working on design challenges, around usability. Sometimes it's really a question, will customers even buy this? Sometimes we're working on something where customers really want this, but the legal group is really freaked out about this. So we have to figure out a way to do it legally. These are all challenges of product. And so discovery is trying to figure that out. Obviously, you better figure that out before you have your engineers spend the next several sprints building it. And that's the idea. That's why discovery is just always happening, just ahead of delivery. You discover the backlog items, you put them on the backlog, the engineers build, QA, test, and deliver them.
Got it. Very good. Makes sense. All right. Another one you might not see, Marty. What's your perspective on user research and discovery versus evaluative research before launch?
Okay, well, that's a big topic too. And there's the person asking the question, I think, might have a little misconception there. So first of all, user research is awesome. And it's such a great career path too for people. If you're, there's just a great place. I just have a niece that I was encouraging to consider user research. It's just such a great, especially entry point for the industry. So, and user research is more appreciated than ever in product teams. We really care about two kinds of research today: the data, the quantitative kind, and the qualitative, and user research is mostly the qualitative. But user research is two kinds of things. Number one is trying to understand what are the things we could do that would be valuable for our customers. That's referred to as generative research. And then the other kind is, okay, we've got a prototype of a better way to solve this problem. We better make sure it works for our customers. That's called evaluative. We are supposed to be doing both of those in product discovery. The person asking the question, I think, has in their mind that you do the evaluative, the second one, at the end, which you can do. We used to do that 20 years ago. Actually, when I learned 40 years ago, that's what we did. We did it at the end because we didn't really have a choice. We didn't have anything to do that test with. Today, we do it before we write code. That's why we use prototypes. If anybody followed the news, you may know there's a very popular prototyping suite from Figma today. My guess is many of you have heard of Figma. They were just sold to Adobe for $20 billion. Okay, and this is a prototyping tool. If you want, how the heck did Adobe pay $20 billion for a prototyping tool? It's because a lot of people do this. That's why. That's why Figma is awesome. They help us do these prototypes that we can then test before we build anything.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see what else do we have here. All right, let's say we know we need to make a big pivot discovered through generative research and then proven out through evaluative research. How do we minimize the disruption to our teams? How do we language and sell these big pivots to teams who have great chemistry while making not so great of a product?
Yeah. Oh, Caitlin, that's a big question. So first of all, there's two kinds of pivots. Really important to say, because the one that gets all the attention in the press hardly ever happens. The much more common pivot is the kind that happens every day. So those are referred to as discovery pivots and vision pivots. So pivot just means this is not working. We need to change courses. Now, a discovery pivot means we have an idea, which we almost always have lots of ideas, right? So we try out that idea in a prototype and it falls flat. Does that mean that the problem was bad? No, normally it just means that idea didn't work. In my experience, about 3/4 of our ideas don't work. That doesn't mean that we don't and the answer isn't that you pivot or you change your company or you change your teams. The answer is you try another approach. In fact, one of Teresa's favorite techniques, is she calls it an opportunity solution tree, is to make sure that you always go into this discovery work realizing if it doesn't pan out, you've got other approaches. Don't stress about it. We've got lots of ways to solve the problem. I really like that. It gets the mindset the way you want it to be. So that's a discovery pivot. Those things happen every day. People don't even call them pivots. That's just iterations in discovery. But that's what you're doing. You're taking a different tack. Now, it might be that we try the prototype and you know what? It's not bad. People they like it, but a lot of them are getting confused by a few things. So we're going to iterate on that. That's just iterating. That's normal, right? We made a little better design. We made some better text. We made it so that people can figure out what to do. All right. And we do a bunch of that. And then we get to the point where is everybody look at each other, the product manager, the designer, the tech lead, we go, are we good? We're good. Put it on the backlog, build it, celebrate. However, sometimes you work for a long time and you still can't come up with something good. And then you might decide, you know what, the real issue here is this company is not going anywhere. It's just not happening, which happens. Doesn't happen nearly as much as people think, because mostly what happens is teams give up before they've given it a real try. And then, of course, what happens is some other startup comes and solves it and they don't understand what went wrong. So, but if you truly give up and you decide we're going to do a totally different company pivot, that's called a vision pivot, where you're now pursuing a whole different problem, whole different opportunity. And those happen. I mean, that is what happened to Facebook. And they pivoted off of, it was it was literally a copy of Hot or Not. That's what they started with, if you even remember that. And then they ended up, creating Facebook, which was successful. And YouTube was a vision pivot as well, off of a dating site. So it happens, but only once in a while. Most of the time, no, the vision is the vision. And in fact, there's a great quote from Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, which is, be stubborn on your vision, but flexible on your details. He's trying to say, don't give up on the vision right away. It usually takes years.
Yeah. I hear it. So a question I'm going to pose for you, Marty, just because we're talking about visions and pivots and changes and such, for a bit of context, I work for a B2B2C company. So our buyers are businesses, but our users are customers. And oftentimes, what I've experienced is when the business asks us to make a change to a product, and that doesn't always align with the actual customer needs. Right. So what advice do you have on approaching the balance between making the buyers happy, but ultimately making your customers happy? Yeah.
Well, first of all, that's a very cool kind of company. Those are very high leverage. The B2B2C, it's a form of a platform company. Those are really good, but it's actually similar to marketplaces. Whether think Airbnb, where they have hosts and guests, or think Etsy, where they have makers and I forget what they call the people like us that buy stuff on there, but or Uber with riders and drivers. So a lot, you've got different kinds of users and customers, and they have different needs. Now, the truth is, most of the time, what's good for one is good for another. So they're not usually at odds, but sometimes they are. Sometimes the things the right thing to do for the host at Airbnb is absolutely the wrong thing to do for guests. Absolutely. And you can imagine that. I was at eBay, early eBay. There was a lot of these examples. The money came from sellers. Most of what sellers wanted was actually quite good for everybody, or at least neutral for buyers. But some of the things they wanted would have killed the company. because buyers would have hated. And the thing we had to explain to the sellers was, if we do this and the buyers go away, you're going to go away. So it's not even helping you. So you have to sort of explain this ecosystem to them. This is often where product principles help to really spell out these dynamics so that you have it. This is the same in ad tech too. An advertiser can put the stupidest ads in the world in front of your face, but if you don't engage with them as a consumer, they don't get any money. So this is where you have to look at that whole ecosystem, and we do. This is what's so critical about product. Look holistically at the product.
Got it. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So next question that came in. It's common for design to report to a CPO, head of product, in a lot of orgs. Do you think product design and engineering having the same leadership weight at an org has an impact on the quality of a product?
Well, so a little bit of this is politics, really. So the truth is, I mean, let's take the sort of judgment out of it for a second. If we look at the actual numbers, engineering dominates. Engineering is like 10 times the size of product and design combined. So engineering dominates. And then you have, so for, let's say you have 100 engineers, you've probably got about 15 to 20 product managers, and you probably have between 5 and 10 designers. Those are the real numbers. In some companies with that kind of ratio, they do have a leader of each of those together, all three. It's pretty rare. Mostly when they do that is because they really want this particular head of design. And so they're giving that head of design a seat at that table. But in the vast majority of companies, I mean, easily 9 out of 10 that I see, there is a head of technology, and then there is a head of product that's got product management and product design. Now, a lot of times that head of product came from design. A lot of times they came from product management. They can come up from either. I love both. I genuinely love product design. I also love product, but I also love engineering, and I was a CTO for a long time. So it's like, you know, they're all really interesting and challenging. But in the vast majority of companies, product management and product design, which includes user research, those are so tight. They need to be so tight that it's not unusual that even when you add them up, you know, that org is still a lot smaller than engineering. They are a single leader. That's just the dynamics there. To me, the bigger issue is whoever that leader is, they better understand the importance of design, and they better understand the real role of product management. Otherwise, that company's got problems. And you know, you can have a very similar discussion on the engineering side, because some come up through QA, some of them come up through software development, some come up through operations. You know, they're different. Whatever they get as that CTO, they better understand technology.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. All right. Got a direct message that came in here. I'd love to know a little bit more about just each of your books and the differences between the three.
Sure, that's easy. Inspired was written for product teams. So it was written for product teams, and in particular, how to do product discovery. So it's written for product managers, designers, and engineers trying to figure out how to do good products. So it's all about that. Empowered was written, I'll tell you the reason I wrote Empowered was because my only desire was really to write Inspired. And also, I've told lots of people this, my favorite topic is product discovery. It's the most fun part of product, for sure. However, when I published the book, it was the first time I became known outside of the sort of Silicon Valley bubble. And a lot of leaders reached out to me. A lot of people reached out to me and said, we want to work this way, but our leaders won't let us. And so I realized, well, we have to share the practices of the leaders too, not just the practices of the teams. And so that was the motivation to write Empowered. And it's all aimed at product leaders, which, just to be clear, is the managers of engineering, design, and product management. So that's who Empowered was for. My partner, Martina Luchenko, who is a longtime Silicon Valley marketing thought leader, she wrote the book Loved, and Loved is aimed at product marketers, marketing in general, but specifically product marketing. And I have one other partner. Well, I have a few other partners. One of them, Jonathan Moore, is writing a book, I think the last book in the series, called Transformed, which is really trying to tackle the hardest of all those topics, which is how do you transform a company from being an old style, feature factory company to a strong product company.
Got it. Very good. Thank you. Kind of along with the book Inspired, which is product focused. What would you say is the most important piece of advice for people in tech to build products that customers love?
The truth is, there's a lot of things that teams need to do right in order to get a successful product. And
Not a silver bullet.
It really isn't. If any of those things go wrong, what a mess. I will tell you though, here's sort of as close to a silver bullet as I know. Let me put it that way. And what I'm about to suggest will cost you $4. Okay. It's the best $4 you'll ever spend. If you go to either Amazon Prime, Apple TV, or Google Play and search for The Lost Interview, it's called The Lost Interview. It's an interview that was done almost 30 years ago with Steve Jobs. It's actually the most remarkable thing. And I couldn't believe it when I saw it. Yeah, it's called The Lost Interview. It was recorded in 1995, right after he had been fired from his own company, Apple, if you remember this. So he was kicked out of Apple and his own company. And he had some time to think about the industry. And he rarely talked about how to create great products. But in that video, he did. And it is truly a master class in creating products. And I thought, I had met him a couple times. I had read all the stuff you could read about him, but this stuff was new and it was gold. And what happened was the video was recorded as part of a documentary about a bunch of nerds, but because he had been kicked out of his own company, they wanted to interview Bill Gates and stuff like that. So they used like 7 minutes out of this hour-plus interview. And what happened was the recording was lost. The tape was, the days of tape, they were lost. And after he died, one of the producers found in his garage a copy of the tape. And he couldn't believe it because he's now watching this tape 30 years later, and he had come back to Apple, turned it to literally the most valuable company in the world, and he realized he had given the recipe in that interview. So he, without any editing or anything, they just uploaded that interview. It's you can see it's unedited, uncut, but it is gold. Wow. And if anybody's interested in really understanding the good, the bad, and the ugly about our industry, it's 1 hour and it is amazing. So that's as close to a silver bullet as I can think of.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, folks, we're coming up on time here. We've got just 2 minutes, so we've got time for 2 more questions. I've got one for you, Marty. I've read in one of your blog posts that you wrote, you talked about advising like younger product managers. I certainly fall into this category, to seek out a manager with a proven track record of success and someone who's willing to pour their time into you and your growth. I have a one-on-one coming up tomorrow with my manager, and I'm always like, have like my head up against the wall. I'm like, I want to make the most of this sacred time, but I don't know how. Like, what are some good questions that I can ask that would make that time meaningful?
Oh, I love that question because that's what everybody really should ask. I didn't have a choice in my I started at my first job was at HP Labs. It was a good place for a first job for an engineer, but I worked there for 10 years, and every single day I had at least one manager assigned to help me get better at my job. So I thought that was normal, always having somebody to coach you. And then I found that, oh my God, I was incredibly lucky. Good companies still do that, but most companies don't. And, you know, I'm doing everything I can to try to change that. And I really love seeing now you know, Cook at Apple has been talking about the role of coaching. Satya at Microsoft and Sundar at Google. They've all been talking about the importance of coaching for their leaders. But the short answer to your question is Google SVPG assessment. What you want to do is sit down, you know, with your manager, and of course, hopefully your manager's got a little experience and is willing to help you. But do that assessment together. That will help you figure out what are the areas you need to develop in. And the idea coaching is the opposite of a performance plan, right? Coaching is to help you get promoted. So it's all about moving up in the organization. That's what your manager needs, is for you to develop the skills so that you can do more and more. Mm-hmm. So the first start is the assessment. And then if you Google SVPG coaching plan, you will see the suggestions based on the gaps, how you can fill it. And those make it very easy for your manager to say, I can help you with that. I can help you with that. Or I know somebody who can spend time tutoring you on that. This was done for me when I was an engineer, and then I became an engineering manager, but then I wanted to learn product management. And my manager said he was a VP of engineering. He said, I don't know. So, but he said, I'll find somebody in the company, which he did, who agreed to coach me. And the first thing he did was an assessment. Mm-hmm. It was very sobering. I knew that there was a lot I didn't know, but I didn't know there was that much I didn't know. Anyway, I came back and he said, don't worry, if you're willing to put in the work, literally 3 months, you can do this. And that made me hopeful again, because when he first did the assessment, I was thinking like, I'll never be a product manager. I'll never be able to make it. But he's like, it's not true. Yeah. And I will tell you, most people I coach are starting from a much better place than I started.
Okay.
So you have to realize I studied computer science. Do you know how many courses I had in finance? 0. Do you know how many courses I had in design? 0. You know, I knew none of these things. And so I had to learn. But the truth is, it's not that hard to learn. If you have somebody who cares enough about you, it's not that hard to learn. It's normally 2 to 3 months, mm-hmm. which is non-trivial. I realize that, but it's not that much. And I will tell you, if every manager spent 3 months developing his or her people, we would have a much different world right now when it came to product.
Mm-hmm. And just tech in general, Marty.
Yes.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for the tool recommendation and creating it for us. So I don't see any other questions to the chat, and I know we're here on coming up on time. So Marty, thanks again for your time, your wisdom. I know we dragged you down a lot of different paths and roads. So appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us today.
No, those were all great questions. I hope they were useful, and I wish everybody the best of luck.
Awesome. Thanks, Marty. And I can't wait to get your new book. I've read 2, but not the 3rd. I didn't know about Loved. I'm so excited to read it.
Well, good. All right. Thank you.
Thanks again, Marty. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. So thank you so much, Olivia. Awesome job. I know that's not easy when you're looking at the chat and dealing with him and, you know, having to kind of bounce around. So thank you so much for that. I just want to pull up the agenda again for everybody. So we have one last little piece, which is our networking mixer. So we're hoping that all of you can join. We are going to take a quick 15-minute break and come back at 3 o'clock Pacific, and then we will be able to connect with our partners and speakers and also network as well. So we'll see you back in a little bit. Thanks.